Now to Iran, where there is still simmering unrest despite a crackdown on protesters. More than 3,000 have died in rallies that erupted over the country's failing economy. That's according to human rights activists and news agency. Other estimates put the death toll much higher. Corruption, inflation and sanctions have pushed Iranians into poverty, and many have lost hope.
The protests in Iran continue. The main trigger for the days-long unrest is the country's dramatic economic situation. Due to high inflation, people can't afford basic goods and services any longer, and they're upset with the authorities they're accusing of ruining the lives of many Iranians.
They have been trying to lower inflation rates. Instead, we saw this past few months, inflation increased maybe by 50%. So the inflation in November ran at an annual rate of 72%. So I don't know if there is the economic means to stabilize prices, stabilize the exchange rate. Iranians are unable to export oil, but they're also unable to export anything else.
Oil and gas exports are Iran's most important source of income. However, due to U.S. sanctions, revenues in this and other sectors are declining dramatically. At the same time, the currency has become virtually worthless overnight. While $1 equaled around 43,000 rials in December, Iranians now have to spend almost 1 million rials for a single dollar. That's an increase of more than 2,200%. Following this massive currency collapse, the head of the Iranian central bank resigned at the end of December. But the economy remains in dire straits. The protests have also given many exiled Iranians hope for change and improvement, but no one knows how it will end.
I was in Iran a few months ago, and I just couldn't believe how my middle-class family could not even simply afford a basic meal. And I come from a middle-class background, let alone to the poor people. There is no future, there is no job, there is no water, there is no electricity.
Meanwhile, U.S. President Trump has reacted to the high death toll and expressed support for the protests, announcing immediate additional tariffs on all countries still doing business with Iran. This primarily affects China, a major buyer of Iranian oil.
Let's look at this with DW reporter and China analyst Cliff Coonan. Welcome back to the studio, Cliff. Is China likely to care about being hit by additional US tariffs for trading with Iran?
I don't think it is. I don't think they take them seriously. I think Trump came out with this statement saying that he would impose these 25% tariffs, but we haven't really seen that much movement on them yet in terms of them actually being enacted. He hasn't taken it much further, so it's still a threat at this point. And in many ways, there's no way that China can bow to this. They've just lost another of their allies, Venezuela, which was also an oil supplier to it. And now it's seen this situation developing in Iran. China hates instability, so it's going to try and play a very delicate sort of balancing act. On Venezuela, they obviously supported the Maduro government, but at the same time, Venezuela is very far away, whereas Iran is on China's doorstep. It's part of what it sees as its strategic sphere of influence. This is a strong ally through this Belt and Road initiative of development projects that China has. They're doing a lot of rail projects. They're doing all kinds of infrastructure things. So the economic links are very close. And then, of course, there's the oil question.
Let's talk about the oil question, though, from the Iranian perspective. Yep. How important are those oil exports for Iran?
Very important, basically. It's about a quarter of the economy, a quarter of GDP. It makes up 60% of government income, which is huge, and nearly all of its export earnings. So it's very, very heavily reliant on oil. It doesn't have any other exports. It's really been since 2012, when sanctions were first introduced, that it's really been squeezed. The oil business has really been squeezed because they were introduced back then over the nuclear program by Obama. They've really felt it, and the economy hasn't really thrived. It's an interesting economy. I mean, it's not like Venezuela. It is actually quite a diversified economy in many ways in terms of how it functions. But it is definitely suffering. So these oil exports are extremely important to Iran.
So we've had these demonstrations over the last few weeks about the economic situation in Iran. Could the regime legitimately say, well, this is not our fault, this is them, this is the Americans crushing us?
They could, but at the same time, I think people sort of feel that there's been a series of things. You know, we've had various protests for various issues over. We had the protests about the role of women. We've had there's been a number of different protests in Iran, and I think what's happening, a key thing here and a key thing in a lot of political unrest is inflation, prices. Bread prices have increased by 113%. Food inflation generally is running at 72%. These mean this, and then the currency is collapsing, as we saw in the report. So this means that people just don't have the money in their pockets, and that's very quickly going to translate into more unrest. So it's basically the people, they do feel that their things aren't working, and they seem to be demanding change.
So if China sees Iran as part of its sphere of influence, do we expect China to step in and support the regime in some way?
I think it's very difficult to see how they could do that. I think what they're going to do instead is try this balancing act. They're going to try and play both sides a little bit. They already do support Iran quite strongly with these development projects and by buying its oil. A lot of the oil doesn't come directly from Iran. It goes to a third country. It's exported under different names.
This is to circumvent American sanctions.
To get around the sanctions. So there's lots of ways around it. There's lots of room for China to kind of to offer its support. It will definitely give sort of political support, and it will make very strong statements, just as it did in Venezuela. And I think it's, as I say, it's more strategically important to China that the situation doesn't descend into instability. But I think also what we've learned from the trade war, the US found that when China introduced all these, they increased the prices of rare earths and critical minerals that US firms need to make their products. They saw very quickly that China has leverage in the trade war. So I think they're going to feel emboldened by this. So in terms of direct intervention, I can't really see it happening beyond political support. But at the same time, we're definitely going to see China not bending too easily, and it's going to take a stance.
All right, thank you for that, Cliff. DW's China analyst, Clifford Coonan.